This is Not Your Father's Fundraising Podcast, a podcast about, you guessed it, nonprofit fundraising. This isn't the first podcast about it, but definitely not like any others you've listened to. This is a podcast for fundraisers, by fundraisers. No boring charts or the same stale best practices you've heard for years. No ideas that only work in theory here. No concepts from people who aren't in the same trenches as you are every single day. Each week, you'll get practical strategies and tips to craft messages that engage donors and raise more money. This isn't smoke and mirrors. Everything has been pressure tested in the real world. Plus, you can start using them as soon as the episode ends. Now, here are your hosts, Ryan Thomas and Steve Thomas.
Hello. Welcome to Not Your Father's Fundraising Podcast. This is episode 28. More ways to know if your fundraising is working. Didn't really intend for last week to be a part one, but then we realized, wait,
we've gone at it and gone at it.
There's a lot of other things.
There's a
lot of other things we could say and talk about it differently because there are really two different ways to think about it, a micro and a macro.
And that's exactly what I spent some time kind of doing. Wait a minute, I need to think about this. We always, in dealing with this with clients or in a consultation, it's a different context than if you're just coming in and saying, "Here, look at these numbers." Like,
look at these slides, how great they are. Like those vacation when you go on vacation to show your slides of your vacation. It's probably about as interesting.
I was never like that.
Okay, well, good for you. I'm your host, Ryan Thomas, Vice President at Oneicity.
And I'm Steve Thomas, CEO and one of the founding partners of Oneicity.
We started this podcast because if you're in fundraising, you know that the work doesn't stop, doesn't care about the week, doesn't pay attention to the day of the week, doesn't pay attention to the month or the hour. It's a 24/7, 365 or 366 kind of job, and it's on your brain in that same way.
Or it should be.
Yeah, if it's not, then
That's
you have
another
you have a
problem.
completely different kind of problem.
That's a different podcast.
Yeah, we'll get to that. But we found ourselves talking about it in situations where not everybody was that interested in not in podcasting, but in fundraising. And so we realized, okay, let's talk about this in a different setting. And like you try to do when someone keeps hitting reply all, we took it offline and we took the offline and put it online in a podcast. And Oneicity is a boutique ad agency. We focus on marketing and fundraising for nonprofits and have done that for more than 30, 40 years. Been doing it forever. We're just fudging numbers. It's great.
Marketing math.
Yeah, it's marketing math. If you round it to the nearest half century.
Well, it's like resumes, right?
Yeah,
it's like a LinkedIn kind of thing.
This is a lot like. Would you connect with me? I'd really like to slide.
Well, I want
those.
the endorsement, the whatever like. Oh, he's good at public speaking.
Oh yeah. I keep putting mine up for he's good looking, and no, I've gotten zero endorsements for that.
Wrong app.
If you'd like to endorse us on LinkedIn or, tell us to stop talking about that or whatever, email any of that feedback or any questions, fundraising related or not, to podcast@oneicity.com and give us your 5-star reviews, 4-star reviews, 3-star reviews, 3.5-star reviews. All fine. Give us a review.
You're not accepting anything below 3.5, right?
Not a 3.5. That's where I draw the line.
Because come on. If you just hated it, hang
you're
up.
not. Yeah, you've swiped out. You're not.
Move along.
You haven't made it this long.
Move
if
along.
we're a 3 or lower.
Yeah.
So give that on wherever it is you get your podcast.
Right.
And
and subscribe over there on the video.
Like and subscribe.
Right over
it's
there.
down here in the left-hand corner. If you're on video, if you're on audio, it's kind of either direction.
Yeah.
It's to the left on your radio dial. The first thing we do every week when we eventually get to our topics is take something that we've seen in the wild. Mail call is sometimes what we call it, but this is a real life example
I have
of
a great one.
marketing or fundraising.
Unlike previous episodes, I've got
well, I mean, it's pretty obvious when it's been a tight week for one of us or both of us to try to find something. So this week, not so much. So what is something you've seen in the wild that applies to fundraising in like real life?
So there's a building concern in the wild out there in the world.
As in growing, not a skyscraper.
Oh, true. That's true. Yes. There's an increasing amount of concern over the U.S. Post Office.
Oh, yeah.
USPS.
Yeah.
Okay. And so, in fact...
Ooh, can I guess?
Please
Is this going to be the postage rate increase?
No.
Okay. Because that happened in late August.
Yeah, there was and then there was the paper,
Yep,
the
and then
mythical paper shortage.
Yeah. Let's see. Hold on. Staff shortages because they're not running it well.
It's sort of generally. So here's what's happening, and I'm going to try to use appropriate language. So there's an abbreviation called CYA, and it's a covering of one's assets, right?
Yep.
You know, you're protecting yourself, right? Okay.
Oh yeah.
So Wells Fargo has sent an email out to everybody on their mailing list about,
Which is basically everybody.
which is everybody, just about, and it's about that. Oh my goodness, the post office has just warned everybody that service may be declining. Dun dun dun.
From declining from their
We're not
all-time
gonna-
records
We're not going to get
of customer satisfaction.
So then you have TechCrunch. They jumped on this. The e-newsletter Quartz, yeah, they ran a big thing about it because of this.
I got something in a trade paper.
Oh yeah,
I guess is what.
The,
you'd
well,
call
and then
it for us.
the nonprofit.
Yeah, that's where I got it.
Yeah,
Or that's where
nonprofit.
I didn't even click on it. It's like I don't. Or I clicked on it. but I
Nonprofit
glanced at it.
Times runs this
Yep.
direct mail to get slower. Okay, wait a minute. I'll do this. There we go. Direct mail to get slower just in time for the holidays.
That was good.
That wasn't bad.
That was, and that's a good
exactly
headline.
the
for them.
headline, man. That's what they did. So here's the deal. So first, let's just say we mail literally millions and millions and millions and millions of pieces of direct mail on behalf of clients, and it works well for our clients. We're not alone in that. So there's a lot of fear-mongering and CYA-ing out there over this. So here's what the people that do all of our work, and so I was on the phone with our fearless co-founder and president of the company, Chris Hoots, who's actually traveling in Florida. She's doing some research into famous entertainment and rides and those kind of things.
Those experiences.
So Florida,
Especially the
mouse.
the rodent family.
So anyway, so I cleared this again with her. She says my take is they're all covering themselves for rural deliveries that have already been delayed and might be more delayed. Primarily, the concern appears to be in the business over packages, not first-class mail envelopes, or even more not the bulk rate and the nonprofit rate, the other rates. So if you're in an area, or you're mailing to if your organization is mailing to donors and you're mailing into a rural area, and you are already noticing, wow, we're seeing some delays, you're going to expect a little more delay. Just count on it, right? And so we have a couple of seasonal clients that we do work for that are in rural areas, and last year those babies were in homes a day or two, in one situation 3 days longer. Here's the thing. If you work with an organization who says, here's the in-home date, hang up on them, because you have never been able to guarantee or predict.
Unless you're paying someone to go drop it, to go put it in mailboxes,
Yeah.
which means you're paying that guy's salary.
Yeah. So So what you're actually doing is you're doing a drop date, and these guys who predict in-home dates, again, that is so fictitious. That is a artificial thing that was never real to begin with. So ignore that. Think drop dates, and then watch when your mail when you're beginning to see your first gift come back. That time frame is the time frame to watch. So no reason to panic. Here's the thing. The post office is not going to cut out the kind of direct mail nonprofits do, because last year, in the category of junk mail, so that's all the stuff that is not your bank statement and the things you've asked to receive, or your Aunt Helen writing you the letter, the things that are in those bulk categories, that accounted for 63% of the USPS's volume. Do you think in a time they're trying to figure out how to make money to balance their budget, they're going to start making it hard for that to go out?
No way.
So, and I want to say, it's not that you don't have to sweat it. It's that it was already a pain, but if you were doing it well, you figured this out. Mentally think, where I've got a really tight deadline, I'm banging on the back end of a date, Thanksgiving, Christmas, 12/31, Giving Tuesday.
Yeah, that's another deadline.
Giving Tuesday newsletter that
Love
you're putting
it.
out. Yeah, that's an
It's
awesome
great.
thing. Let's see previous episodes. Don't sweat that, right? Just make sure you've got a little margin. You needed to build margin in anyway, and do that.
If your Thanksgiving is dropping on the Tuesday before Thanksgiving anyway, that's already a problem.
Could be a little tight. So just to allow for a day or two, and know your mileage is going to vary particularly if you're out in
If you're out in the sticks.
yeah. Okay.
That is good.
That was
That's
perfect.
a good one.
And it really was in the wild.
Yeah,
And
it really was in the
It was
wild.
a mailbag episode.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
Mine
Beat that.
Mine is my only chance is that mine is cookies. And there's
But I always accept cookies when they ask
on
me.
on the websites. I accept cookies everywhere.
Oh, I know.
This
these
is a
guys.
company that is semi-local. I think they're also in Colorado. It's called Tiff's Treats. What they do is they deliver warm cookies, which that sounds like your in-home date as fictitious. Nobody can deliver warm cookies. I can deliver cookies that then get warmed up in the oven. They literally deliver warm cookies.
Because I'm just gonna. Can I give a testimonial?
For sure.
I was at an event where
Those appeared.
They appeared, and it was like, well, they bring. It's wow. They came. These are warm.
They have a delivery radius from their shops, so they build in cooling time. They line their boxes, especially with foil. They do all these things for the magical experience of opening a box, and it's a warm, melty cookie.
Just like your mom used to make.
It really is.
Yeah, that's amazing.
No surprise, we are on their mailing list. They don't yet have a loyalty program.
And we're open for sponsorship.
I'm waiting for. Yeah, I would.
If they wanted to. Yeah.
So we could make them a sweet deal. But I got a piece of mail from them that I'll show this to the camera. There we go. The front is just a stack of melty cookies.
Oh, they're
As Tiff's Treats as their logo, so you know it's from, and it says 50% off warm cookies. Details on reverse side. And then on the back, it talks about, hey, if you use this coupon, you can do this. Here's where you go. They got the app. Here are the terms and conditions, blah, blah, blah. Where this applies is the front, which is sort of your OE front. They just get your attention. It would be very easy to put everything I need to know right here.
Oh, yeah.
Terms and conditions.
Such a bad idea.
And I don't want to sound like we're contradicting, because if you've listened to our other episodes, there have been times where I've pointed out envelopes that did have everything you needed, but it was very scannable and it was on two sides.
That's right.
And so the front of this piece, which is the front of your envelope, if we're drawing an analogy, gets my attention, which is its job. Get me to pull this out of the mail stack, and then look at it. And then I look at the back, and then I convert. And so when you're designing your envelopes, which we've talked about before, the front of your envelopes, your teasers, headlines, and leads of your letters should be 75 to 80% of your time you spend on a job. Focus on in the envelope what is going to make a donor, one of your donors, stop and at least glance at this out of the stack of mail. That could be a face if you are helping people. It could be a bright color. It could be the absence of color if you've been doing color a lot. There are lots of options, but focus on that and let that shine, and then use other things around it. The other side of the envelope, below the window, there's enough space for you to put a subhead to give other information to get someone in, because the main goal of the envelope 90% of the time is to just get somebody in the letter. Doesn't have to do the whole thing. It doesn't have to take you from 0 to 100, just enough to take another step. Then the lead takes you another step, and you keep walking until all of a sudden you've given a gift and you're a recurring monthly donor.
Nice.
So next, let's see if you can top your scene in the wild with your try this.
I can, but I've got to apologize for our video people. I wasn't day trading over here. I realized that I'd forgotten to turn the air conditioner off.
Well, yeah.
So there was that.
There's a little bit of line, but it's okay.
Because if I could have turned off the cicada last week, I would have.
Yeah, that was nuts.
I don't have the cicada app, so okay. So my try this.
Yeah, try this.
I spent the day copywriting, and I realized we hadn't talked about part of this, which is start with a call to action. If you're a writer, or if you're reviewing copy from agency or consultant or someone in house. The tendency, and we've talked about headlines and openings and all of that stuff. Your tendency is to, man, I got a great headline. I'm going to dive in here. I'm going to go at this. But if you don't have clear in your mind the goal of what you want the reader scanner to do, you're just like writing a 7th grade essay. So start with the call to action. Yes, you got to get them in. Yes, the headline's still important. Those 80-20 rules, all those things we've talked about in previous episodes. The point, though, is if you don't know what you want the reader to do and where you're going to position that in the piece, you're just kind of going to write a bunch of stuff, and you are not going to work very efficiently, and you probably will not have a very strong call to action. So start with just try. If you're a copywriter, and I know there are folks they're listening that's their job. As you start, think about the opening, all that stuff, but remind yourself, what are you trying to get the people who are reading this, or they're scanning this more logically? What do you want them to do? And that is more than send money. That is send money to do what? Back to the scaffolding and the ask. And begin there and make sure you've got that crystal clear in your mind, because once you get that, and I just put that at the top of my scratch pad as I'm working on the computer, then I know as I'm get all creative and wow, that was awesome. I've still got to go back and look at, but I've got to get them to that point where they're wanting to jump in on that.
Similar to authors talk about knowing where their story is going, or
Exactly.
TV people knowing this is how it's going to go.
Same idea.
Yeah. All right, mine is repeat yourself. Donors are scanning.
Yep.
And you need to say, so your call to action, you need to have your call to action. It needs to be strong, but somebody could miss it in their scanning.
Exactly. Good.
So say it again. And
Perfect.
It doesn't have to be exactly verbatim. You don't have to copy and paste, but your most salient points, which are going to be your call to action and maybe a consequence or a reason, but part of that scaffolding, insert that multiple instances of your letter or newsletter.
Yep.
Because That just gives you more at bats. If you don't do that, if you don't repeat yourself, you have to bat 1,000. And nobody bats 1,000. Just doesn't happen.
Yeah. That's the whole point.
So repeat yourself.
Repeat yourself then.
Yeah, repeat yourself. That's from the Department of Redundancy Department.
Good. I like that.
Kind of taking a redundancy angle. This isn't going to be redundant, even though we are, again, talking about donors and how you can know your fundraising is working.
Yep.
Last week, we talked about it unintentionally in a very micro sense.
Yeah.
Looking at ROI on your fundraising, income brought in.
Response rates a little
response
bit.
rates.
Click-throughs, some of that kind of stuff. Episode 27.
It's 27. Just click back. It's probably in your suggested episodes. Another way, and not better or worse, if you, like we've talked about with any of these metrics, if you only are looking at one metric without taking the others into account, it's not correct. You're not going to learn anything. The micro things we talked about last week are very important.
Critical.
These are also important.
Yeah, and in fact, I like how you're starting there, because I went back and thought, as I was reviewing the episode, I didn't make clear that these are the micro measures.
Well, and that's because we didn't plan it that way.
Yeah, because it was like, and part of it was the idea that, we need to really talk about, and part of it is I just want to talk about ROI. And that was
that's a lot of fun.
It's kind of my burden.
Let's shoehorn ROI talk.
So ROI, response rate, click through, some of those that we talked about last week, they're the micro that we were saying. I also thought about, those are sort of tactical. Those are the if we're looking at an impact, or we're looking at our newsletters this year, or we're looking at Thanksgiving season, those are the ROI, response rate, all of those fit that kind of tactical, or I don't like the 10,000 and 30,000 foot, but those are the lower level altitudes, whatever you think about, I don't know. And that, it's nearer the horizon than, the vast. Anyway, so what we'll talk about are the macro, the strategic, the higher level. Right?
Yep. Higher level, bigger picture.
Global.
Pick your business-focused metaphor. We're going to interface about that.
The last thing I want to say about it is, and then we're going to jump to the actual word, is to say the previous episode ones are easier to affect quickly.
Yes.
Okay? So they are the ones that you can grab a dial and actually make something happen in a quarter, or in this cycle, or the next time that rolls around.
The ones we're going to talk about, if you can do it in a fiscal year,
the big long period,
turnaround,
and then now say why. Well, then I'm just going to, because I just like doing things I can see results on. So why would you focus on these others?
Well, if you don't focus on these, you will miss that the health of your organization is failing.
Yeah, it's sort of like. I was at the doctor recently, and it's like, well, we'll see you again next year. And if you want to skip that, no problem. You can save some money, but who knows what's going on
what's gonna
inside
happen.
your head.
It's the only time you look.
Yeah, okay.
So the first thing, and this is not necessarily in order of importance, because again, just like the micros are important, these macros are important, all of the macros are important, all the micros are important. The first one, let's talk about, is pretty easy to understand that your organization depends on this, is number of donors, count of donors. How many donors does my organization have? And that's easy, except you can cut that a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Traditionally, we focus on total active donors, people who have given in 13-ish months.
Yeah. Well, no, who have given in a period.
Well, that's true. In a period.
Yeah. So you pick that period and you count it, and that gives you repeatability.
Yep.
Because that way you can compare that fixed window back to fixed windows, that rant, that period back each time.
That's how it makes it. The same way, again, we're not personal trainers, we're not doctors, but if you are someone who is going to weigh yourself consistently,
Exactly.
you weigh yourself consistently at a consistent time of day.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that can be noon.
Yeah. Or
If it's noon every day.
or every Monday.
Yeah, or every Monday.
However you want to do that.
But
Yeah.
the more variable you put in,
Yeah.
the harder it is. Garbage in, garbage out.
Don't change your scale
Yep,
every week.
that's right. Don't buy a new one all
I
the
don't
time.
like that one. That one did. So yeah, active donors. So we usually I'm not sure I even have an exception, but are always counting people who gave a financial gift, not a gift in kind, not volunteer
Yeah,
hour.
that's true.
Yeah, you got to have given. And except for our Canadian clients, U.S. dollars. So the
Yeah.
Canadian clients, Canadian dollars.
We take those dollars.
Yeah, you betcha.
Hey,
And how many gave in that period? If you gave $1 or $100,000 or $1 million, you still get
You're
counted
one
as a
donor.
one, right? Okay.
everybody's equal.
And with almost no exceptions, we're doing households in this count, even though we say donors.
Correct.
Yeah. So, and that's the way most databases are going to handle it, and so that works that way. Okay. Active donors. That's your and let's just say on all of these things we're looking at a count, and that number means almost nothing unless you compare it to something. You have 1,000 donors. Woohoo! Well, last year you had
Had 2,000, 3,000.
oh bad, or you had 500 last year. Oh good.
Or and so there can be other things. We can talk about some fun reason or some fun ways that matters. But the other thing or another thing to look at, in addition to count donors, this is number of households, number of people, number of donors that are actively engaged with you, which means you can reasonably count on possibly getting money from them in your next impact.
Yeah.
Another one to think about is number of gifts in this period, count of gifts, which you can also think about as number of literal transactions to you.
That's exactly what I wrote. How many transactions?
And this is another one where a $100 donor and a $1 donor and a $1,000 donor all count the same.
Exactly. Because that is another way you're able to keep score on what's going on in the database. You get this count, and that's going to be probably a bigger number than the number of donors.
Well, and that's one of the things I was going to say is if you have 1,000 donors and you have 1,000 gifts in the same period, that means you'd better be getting a lot of money per gift because that's not a lot.
Yeah. Well, so we can talk about secondary metrics that can pop out of that.
Yep.
You know, it's hard not to go there. So, okay,
You can
just
have-
stay with. Okay, we got donors, we got gifts,
Count of donors, count of gifts,
and dollars.
income, which we talked about last week.
Yeah.
but
Those
still
are the
a big
three.
deal.
Those are the three big metrics you should always look at. And here's what I would suggest. I alluded to this: is none of those numbers mean squat unless you compare it. And so I
true.
like two kinds of comparisons. Last year, comparing if it's calendar to calendar, so this calendar and then calendar last year, and then some kind of historical look back 5 years ago, or you can do a trend line year to year to year over the last 5 or 6 years, so you can kind of see what happened with our count of donors, count of gifts, that kind of thing, or our income. How did we do in comparison? If you have your eye on those three, and you're not coveting someone else's donors or worrying about a benchmark, you're just saying, do we have more donors last year than this year, or this year than last year? Yes, good. Do we sort of know why that happened? Yes, good. Do some more of that. Mm-hmm. We have fewer of those donors. Oh, that's not good. But wow, we had a whole lot more gifts. What drove that?
Because gift count, we just say not every donor is created equally or gives to you equally is probably a better way to say it. And so you can have gift count be agnostic. Your donor count can drop. Your income can rise.
Yep.
Usually your gift count also rises, but it could stay the same. Your donors could go down, your money could go up. And that could be because the donors you lost were not giving you a significant amount of money.
Right.
And you had or gained more donors who were giving you a lot of money.
Yep. And in fact, a real world example, we followed other purveyors of fundraising, other agencies into a client relationship, and realized that group's target was they were so focused on just getting a donor that they were willing to get a donor whose single largest gift ever was $10, rather than pursuing a $25 or a $35 donor or a higher donor. And so one of these things that these metrics that give you is the ability to spot how your strategies are playing out over time, and how is that really playing out for the organization? Wow, we added a lot of donors, but they're $10 donors.
Are they the right ones?
Yeah.
Are they going to help us?
Exactly.
And it's always an interesting conversation with a client coming in, because this has happened multiple times where we've come behind an organization who had gotten a bunch of donors for that client.
Yeah.
And we had to explain, okay, one thing you're going to see, because we've learned that people who get a lot of donors for a client also train the client to look there first. Look at this number. This is the important number.
It is the, look over here, look over here, look over here.
And so we would say, hey, this is probably going to drop. And not by onesie, twosies. It's going to drop by a bit. But if you let us do what we're going to do, these other two numbers are going to go up.
And it's fascinating to sit with leadership in an organization and walk them through these metrics. And many leaders are already familiar with them, but they may not have thought about how they relate to each other. And then we'll just mention these secondary ones briefly. Once they see the relationship, and then you say, here's what's happening. Boy, you can see there's those light bulbs start popping up over heads, and people are like, I want to stop doing that today. So, well, yes, we're on
it. And that can be a hard thing to relearn.
Exactly.
But it is important. And then going to the secondary metrics that, in my visual brain, overlap the primaries, which is how you get the secondary metrics.
Yeah.
Gifts per donor is another one, is a secondary, which is literally just taking your transactions and the number of donors, doing some division.
Yeah.
And that tells you how engaged each donor is.
It'll also tell you if you've been pursuing only a monthly donor strategy, or ignoring a monthly donor strategy, or if you only have one big thing a year.
And which...
Nothing wrong with any of those things, right?
I was going to say, with everything, your mileage may vary, but as long as you get to your destination, you're okay.
Yeah.
But if you are a year-long organization who is fundraising all year, which is kind of what we're geared towards,
yeah,
and you see that your gifts per donor is dropping or not moving up, and it's a 1 or a 2, that's when you think about, okay, how do I get these donors to give again?
Yeah.
It's a separate episode, but that's something you should think about. We may do a series. How do I make this go up? How do I make this go up? How do I make that go up? Another one to look at is average gift.
Yeah, that is, again, number of gifts and the dollars.
Now it's math.
The math thing
can mostly work out and do.
One of the things that's interesting about that is that tells you about your ask strategies. How are you asking these donors? What are you asking them to give to? Are donors responding? And it is fascinating how we have clients where 2 years ago I remember saying, we've been, and the technical term is oonching up. We've been oonching up this average gift, and I'm pretty sure this year we're pretty close to what we can expect.
We found your ceiling.
Yeah. And then it's fascinating how often it's like, okay, I told you last year this was the ceiling, but okay, we hunched up a little bit again.
It's
right?
kept going.
Yeah. And so, again, you're looking at these over time and saying, do we have an understanding about why this is going up? Because average gift can go up because you're shedding donors and you only have a few donors left and they're all giving you big.
Which is a great example of why don't just look at one of these. You have to look at all of them at the same, it's literally the same time and not just the same time period. I mean, literally, it's best if you get a dashboard that shows all of them.
Can't leave
or
the
you're
movie,
flipping
man.
back
You
and
gotta
forth.
You got to stay with it and see how they connect because, and you do not have strategy conversations that are big in terms of, annual strategy or what you're doing as an organization without starting with, here's where we are.
Yep.
And here are our problems, or here's what we're accelerating.
Back to your something you saw in the wild. Starting with that call to action. Here's where we are, which then tells us where we want to go.
Yeah.
Now we're going to build off of that.
Okay, the last piece. Do the last one of these secondary metrics.
Crap, I forgot which one.
Did you know which one? Okay, I'll do it because this
I've
one I've been
lost
waiting
track
for.
of which ones I've done.
Income per donor.
Oh, income per donor.
So this one is sort of a poor person's or an easy indication of donor value. It is just the math of how many dollars and how many donors, and how. But it's a clue into value. It doesn't actually work as value because it's too simple a calculation. But without spending a bunch of money on analytics, you really can understand what's going on. And one of the things that can happen with income per donor is that many people in your organization, if you're an organization that's got staff and people around, they have no clue what most donors are, I'm air quoting here, worth. But that can be such an enlightening thing to be able to say, wow, these people, our donors, in this simple calculation, they're worth
this much money
$400 a piece, $300 a piece, whatever. And so though that secondary metric is one of the ones that I love, because it just lets you see what your donors, how valuable they can be to you in a year.
Which, let's just say, can be a difficult thing to wrap your brain around, assigning value to people.
Oh, I have no problem with that. That's easy.
Why? I mean, I have a problem with that. I can envision.
Because you're a better person than I am.
There are lots of people who have a problem with that. I'm not going to do this problem, but it's kind of a hard thing. But it's an important metric, even if it's uncomfortable in an emotional sense, because that helps you understand if you're going after the right people.
Exactly. And it helps you. I've shared in other episodes, I've been in situations where staff of the organization didn't love fundraising and sort of didn't have an appreciation for how much donors loved what the organization was doing, and it was part of a culture shift at work. This income per donor indication is a way to say, you need to understand this is how much these people love what we're doing. These are, these folks are doing significant kinds of things.
It's important.
Yeah, it's a biggie.
Yeah, I like the idea of doing kind of an episode about each of these things.
That would be kind of fun.
But pay attention to those things, and you can use spreadsheets to kind of automate looking. Ideally, if you're using an agency, they should be showing you these things. And if they're not showing you one or two of the things we've mentioned, ask for it.
We had the most interesting, you know what I'm going to say,
Yeah, I know
right?
exactly what you're
So we had a client who we
Who's
ran
a former client.
We ran into them who was in leadership at this organization. They left.
He left.
He left the organization.
We're still working with the organization.
And we're still working with the organization, and he is in a situation where he hasn't hired us yet. And he
Yeah.
said his current agency, he actually said, "Hey, I want to see these numbers because that stuff you're showing me is not.
Tell me what I need to know.
I don't need.
I want to see this, and this."
And it was this list.
Yeah, because he called it the Chris report after Chris
Hoots.
And to their credit, again, I don't want to diminish anybody. We're not naming names, but they said, "Yeah, okay, we can show you that."
Yeah.
Never thought about that.
If you really want to know that.
And he said that he's pretty sure they've now added that to their deck because they thought, "Oh, that's a good idea." And there have been times where not at these core levels, which are what we lead a presentation to a client with in terms of this is slide 1 or 2.
Yeah.
But there have been times where a client has asked us, "Hey, can I see
Oh yeah.
this weird segment of thing that I used to get in my other agency?" And we're like, "Yeah, sure." And we thought, okay, that's kind of it.
Yeah.
It's usually a slide 17 or 18 kind of thing, but there can be things to learn.
Well, these came out of in the very early days in the primordial ooze of Winicity of me on a rant with the fact that how much reporting I was used to seeing from people doing work like we were doing that was not actionable. Mm-hmm. It was, wow, I didn't know that. That's really, and that's where my famous or infamous, report pornography line came from. It's like, I don't need to be looking at that. That doesn't help me. That doesn't take me in a good place.
What do I do with that right now?
Give me something that's actionable. And one of the rules we've always had about reporting is if someone can't make a decision or validate a decision, we don't want to show them a report. Mm-hmm. It's useless.
Yeah. Doesn't matter.
Yeah. So, all right. So ready for the recap?
Let's recap.
Okay. So you've already focused on dollars probably. So we'll just start there. Income, dollars. And then your other is count of active donors, count of gifts in the period. So those are
your big 3.
My suggestion is calendar year or fiscal year. Your donor software may do a version of this. Just dig into how that works and make sure that you're getting that. There's a lot of funkiness in some of that software. So just work on that.
That's not nearly as streamlined or cut and dry as it.
Yeah.
And
so just don't get bogged down in other stuff. Eyes on the prize. These 3 are your biggies. Then you look at the gifts per donor. That's one that won't move very much. You're talking about when's he point
0.1,
gifts,
0.2,
0.3.
0.3.
So you're not going to get a
parts
lot
of a gift.
Average gift, that gives you some indication of how your ask strategies are working. And then income per donor, which is one of my favorites, that gives you some sense of value and an indication of what's going on and what level of and are your strategies bringing in and connecting with donors that you want to? Because nothing wrong with small donors.
No,
you can fuel incredible ministry and cause and work with small donors. Just make sure that's what your strategy is.
You just have to know.
Yeah.
Don't count on 3 or 4 big donors if you're only getting 10 or 12 small donors.
Exactly.
Next is on your radar, which is something that came out of you and I passing articles or things we've seen back and forth, and sometimes fundraising related, sometimes not, and just something that is worth looking at, watching, should be on your radar. So you've been going first lately, so what is on your radar? What should be on our radar?
So I think it's an app, LastPass, which is the password manager I use actively, and they did a survey of users. They did a survey of people who were in their target market. Mm-hmm. And it was an international survey, and I'm a little disappointed it was only 3,700 professionals, so not a big sample. But it was really mind-blowing to me, some of the things that popped out. And if you're curious about this, and if you have a computer, or your office has a computer, or you've ever seen somebody in your office with a password written on a Post-it note, you probably want to check this out. It's LastPass. You can Google, email podcast@winicity.com, and we'll send you the link. So following it, these are just some of the findings that I went, I cannot believe this. Following a data breach. So a data breach in their organization, or that
stuff
like
gets stolen, your passwords get out.
let your passwords get out as they did or whatever. 45% of the people didn't change all their passwords. Here's another one. And these aren't in any particular order. These are just things I was like, I got to talk about this. 90% of the people who responded had up to 50 online and app accounts. 50. That's a lot of little Post-it notes written on your desk.
Well, and what that means is you're likely using one or two passwords across those 50.
It is amazing the number of people who do that.
Which then means, and the reason that matters is that hackers know, people on the dark web know that. And so if they get one email address and password, they will just bank that you are using that same combination at all these other places.
Gonna run with it. Okay, so I'll just do one more. And this is the one. This is one that said only 8% said a strong password is one that excludes personal information like pet names.
Meaning, to flip it around to make that make a little more sense and be a little scarier, 92% of people said that a strong password could contain my pet's name.
Which then they posted on social media. Mm-hmm. I mean, it'd be like, and so just for the hackers watching, will never appear in a password.
Yeah, as you should.
So, reach of the dog barking is making me crazy. So I'll just end there and say, if you're curious. So first,
if he was ever going to be in a password, he's not now. He's barked at you and ticked you off.
Dog. Well, he's a dog. He's going to bark. So what dogs are going to bark? Okay, but anyway, LastPass, their survey on passwords, or email us and I'll send it to you. It's a big deal.
Mine is a weird, interesting story I hadn't heard of until this weekend. But a guy named Anthony Kim is actually from this area where we are, the Dallas area, was a big, not a massive golfer, not a Tiger or a Phil Mickelson level golfer, but a good enough golfer. He had some heroics in the Ryder Cup, which is an event that the U.S. play against Europe in the late aughts, early teens.
Okay.
Had an injury, and in rehabbing his injury and going over, some insurance things, it came up that he could take an injury settlement from his insurance payment, from his insurance policy of $24 million.
Oh.
All he had to do is just not play golf again. Or he couldn't enter in a PGA event. I mean, he can play at his local club.
Oh, what an interesting
essentially
choice.
It's like, yeah, it's not golfer's elbow, but it's it's something that you're probably gonna get that again. Yeah. But if you won't do that, here you go.
Yeah.
And so he was a good name brand golfer. Took a one-time payout of $25 million and has not played in any type of event ever since, in like a decade. And what strikes me is and this is not a judgment because I would probably take that because that's guaranteed $24 million, is the makeup and the personality of somebody who, unless he is even Tiger worked really hard. Unless you're some sort of prodigy and you got to where you are without having to work hard, you've invested
in golf,
hours and days and years to get to this point, and then you just take a payout to go do something else.
Oh,
and again, not a judgment because I would totally have done that.
You got to choose, right? Those aren't easy choices.
Everybody's got a number. It's an easy number. It's an easy thing for me, but.
What an interesting thing. Because you always think about the insurance payouts as, somebody who's faking a neck injury or something like that, and they wear the little, the collar in the movies or the, the old TV shows.
And I don't know the intricacies of that, so it may not be an insurance payment, maybe some sort of other
contract thing.
But there was some sort of, if you don't do this,
you get this. His business guy said, well, of course, you could get 24 mil by just not playing. What?
Yeah. and now... he doesn't, he's kind of grown his hair out. He has sort of not hippie, but
He's got a dive bar in Florida, and
no, he still lives around here, and people see him pseudo places. He kind of looks like a Silicon Valley guy. He's apparently in hoodies a lot with longer hair and just kind of chill, and will take pictures if people recognize him. He's got tattoo sleeves and
how interesting.
Yeah, it was crazy. I heard a mention of it and thought, that can't be right, and did some Googling. And yeah, Google him, and there are tons of stories. There's not even one to cite because I ended up reading 3 or 4. But
so do you have like some sort of insurance contract thing so that if you get hurt doing fundraising?
I would be paper cutting and
That's why you don't have it.
Tripping.
When you're running the show, you can figure that all out.
Yeah, okay. They know not to insure me because I'd take that payout as soon as it was ready. Oh, well, payouts aside, injuries aside, dogs barking aside.
So if they wrote you a big check, would you stop podcasting?
Yeah, for sure.
I'm shocked.
You shouldn't be.
Yeah, I'm not really.
Okay, because bird in the hand. I'm gonna take that every time.
Read the paperwork.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying for $500 because that's a long time to never do something. But the number's not impossible to reach for a big company.
24 million would be your number.
Oh yeah, for 24 billion, I would totally do that.
Okay, so the word's out.
Here we go.
Yeah,
podcast at onenicity.com.
Want to give your Venmo?
Yeah, figure out my Venmo account name.
Okay, be sure and change the password.
Yeah, I would change the password. Got to take my dog out of there. Can't have it be Peyton related. But this was episode 28.
It was.
Of Not Your Father's Fundraising Podcast. Send us your questions to podcast at Winicity. Give us your reviews, your 5-star reviews. 4-star, 3-star, that's fine. Like and subscribe down here in the video.
Yep.
Because next week, on episode 29, we're going to talk about why you should use Comic Sans as a central pillar in your next corporate rebranding.
Oh, I think that's one thing many people are missing.
It's overlooked.
It is overlooked. It's an opportunity.
It's not used enough.
No question.
I'm Ryan Thomas.
And I'm Steve Thomas.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Not Your Father's Fundraising Podcast. If you've enjoyed the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort. Tune back in next week for another fresh episode of Not Your Father's Fundraising Podcast.